What is up, everybody? We're on day 84 of our Bible in a Year series, and gonna have an interesting turn of events today in the reading we're doing, which is 1 Samuel. We're starting off in chapter 13, and we'll get through 16 today. So let's jump right in. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 42 years over Israel. He chose 3,000 men from Israel for himself. 2,000 were with Saul at Michmash and in Bethel's hill country, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. He sent the rest of his troops away, each to his own tent. Jonathan attacked the Philistine garrison in Gibeah, and the Philistines heard about it. So Saul blew the ram's horn throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." And all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine garrison, and Israel is now repulsive to the Philistines. Then the troops were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines also gathered to fight against Israel, 3,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and troops as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Bethaven. The men of Israel saw that they were in trouble because the troops were in a difficult situation. They hid in caves and thickets, among rocks, and in holes and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul, however, was still at Gilgal, and all his troops were gripped with fear. He waited 7 days for the appointed time that Samuel had set. But Samuel didn't come to Gilgal, and the troops were deserting him. So Saul said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." Then he offered the burnt offering. So, something's not right. Something's not adding up. Is Saul supposed to be doing the offerings? No. We know from what we read previously, who is supposed to be doing the offerings? The Levitical priest. And they're the only ones allowed to do the offering. Saul went ahead and did it on his own. Okay. Verse 10. Just as he finished offering the burnt offering, Samuel arrived. So Saul went out to greet him, and Samuel asked, "What have you done?" Saul answered, "When I saw that the troops were deserting me, and you didn't come within the appointed days, and the Philistines were gathering at Michmash, I thought, the Philistines will now descend on me at Gilgal, and I haven't sought the Lord's favor. So I forced myself to offer the burnt offering." So, let me translate. I didn't trust God. Again, whatever reasons you want. And we do this too today. Come up with reasons why we need to do something differently than what God has told us to do, or what we see outlined in Scripture for how something should be done. And we always have good reasons. We always have good justification. But ultimately what it comes down to is you don't trust God. And I'm pointing my finger at myself with this too. I've done this. This is straight up disobedience. Verse 13. Samuel said to Saul, "You have been foolish and have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. It was at this time that the Lord would have permanently established your reign over Israel. But now your reign will not endure. The Lord has found a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler over his people, because you have not done what the Lord commanded." Then Samuel went from Gilgal to Gibeah in Benjamin. Saul registered the troops who were with him, about 600 men. Saul, his son Jonathan, and the troops who were with them were staying in Gibeah of Benjamin, and the Philistines were camped at Michmash, raiding parties. When, if you can't see, so there's these little speech bubbles that are like notes, the links to other parts, and sometimes it can mess up my reading flow. Verse 17. Raiding parties went out from the Philistine camp in 3 divisions. One division headed towards the Ophrah road leading to the land of Shual. The next division headed toward Beth Horon road, and the last division headed down the border road that looks out over Zeboim Valley toward the wilderness. No blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel, because the Philistines had said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. So all the Israelites went to the Philistines to sharpen their plows, mattocks, axes, and sickles. The price was 2/3 of a shekel for plows and mattocks, and 1/3 of a shekel for pitchforks and axes, and for putting a point on a cattle prod. So on the day of battle, not a sword or spear could be found in the hand of any of the troops who were with Saul. And Jonathan, only Saul and his son Jonathan had weapons. Now a Philistine garrison took control of the pass at Michmash. Chapter 14. That same day, Saul's son Jonathan said to the attendant who carries his weapon, come on, let's cross over to the Philistine garrison on the other side. However, he did not tell his father. Saul was staying under the pomegranate tree in Migron on the outskirts of Gibeah. The troops with him numbered about 600. Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod, was also there. He was the son of Ahitub, the brother of Ichabod, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the Lord's priest at Shiloh. But the troops did not know that Jonathan had left. There were sharp columns of rock on both sides of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine garrison. One was named Bozez, the other Senna. One stood to the north in front of Michmash, the other to the south in front of Gibeah. Jonathan said to the attendant who carried his weapons, come on, let's cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised men. It was an insult. These uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will help us. Nothing can keep the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. His armor bearer responded, do what is in your heart. Go ahead. I'm completely with you. All right, Jonathan replied, we'll cross over to the men and then let them see us. If they say, wait until we reach you, then we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, come on up, then we'll go up, because the Lord is handing them over to us. That will be our sign. They let themselves be seen by the Philistine garrison, and the Philistines said, look, the Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they've been hiding. The men of the garrison called to Jonathan and his armor bearer. Come on up, and we'll teach you a lesson, they said. Follow me, Jonathan told his armor bearer, for the Lord has handed them over to Israel. Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet with his armor bearer behind him. Jonathan cut them down, and his armor bearer followed and finished them off. In that first assault, Jonathan and his armor bearer struck down about 20 men in a half-acre field. Terror spread through the Philistine camp and the open fields to all the troops. Even the garrison and the raiding parties were terrified. The earth shook and terror spread from God. When Saul's watchmen in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, they saw the panicking troops scattering in every direction. So Saul said to the troops with him, call the roll and determine who has left us. They called the roll and saw that Jonathan and his armor bearer were gone. Saul told Ahijah, bring the ark of God, for it was with the Israelites at that time. While Saul spoke to the priests, the panic in the Philistine camp increased in intensity. So Saul said to the priests, stop what you are doing. Saul and all the troops with him assembled and marched to the battle, and there the Philistines were fighting against each other in great confusion. There were Hebrews from the area who had gone earlier into the camp to join the Philistines, but even they joined the Israelites, who were with Saul and Jonathan. When all the Israelite men who had been hiding in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they also joined Saul and Jonathan in battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day. The battle extended beyond Beth-aven, and the men of Israel were worn out that day, for Saul had placed the troops under an oath. The man who eats food before evening, before I have taken vengeance on my enemies, is cursed. So none of the troops tasted any food. Everyone went into the forest, and there was honey on the ground. When the troops entered the forest, they saw the flow of honey, but none of them ate any of it, because they feared the oath. However, Jonathan had not heard his father make the troops swear the oath. He reached out with the end of the staff he was carrying and dipped it into the honeycomb. When he ate the honey, he had renewed energy. Then one of the troops said, "Your father made the troops swear. The man who eats food today is cursed, and the troops are exhausted." Jonathan replied, "My father has brought trouble into the land. Just look at how I have renewed my energy, because I tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the troops had eaten freely today from the plunder they took from their enemies. Then the slaughter of the Philistines would have been much greater." The Israelites struck down the Philistines that day from Michmash all the way to Aijalon. Since the Israelites were completely exhausted, they rushed to plunder, took sheep, goats, cattle, and calves, slaughtered them on the ground, and ate meat with the blood still in it. Again, this is a no-no, right? This is something that they're expressly condemned from doing. Because if you remember back in Leviticus, it talks about you're not supposed to eat an animal with blood still flowing through it, because the life is in the blood. Verse 33. Some reported to Saul, "Look, the troops are sinning against the Lord by eating meat with the blood still in it." Saul said, "You have been unfaithful. Roll a large stone over here at once." He then said, "Go among the troops and say to them, let each man bring me his ox or his sheep. Do the slaughtering here, and then you can eat. Don't sin against the Lord by eating meat with the blood in it." So every one of the troops brought his ox that night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first time he had built an altar to the Lord. Saul said, "Let's go down after the Philistines tonight and plunder them until morning. Don't let even one remain." "Do whatever you want," the troops replied, but the priest said, "Let's approach God here." So Saul inquired of God, "Should I go after the Philistines? Will you hand them over to Israel?" But God did not answer him that day. Saul said, "All you leaders of the troops, come here. Let's investigate how this sin has occurred today. As surely as the Lord lives, who saves Israel, even if it is because of my son Jonathan, he must die." Not one of the troops answered him. So he said to all Israel, "You will be on one side, and I and my son Jonathan will be on the other side." And the troops replied, "Do whatever you want." So Saul said to the Lord, God of Israel, "Why have you not answered your servant today? If the unrighteousness is in me or in my son Jonathan, Lord God of Israel, give Urim, but if the fault is in your people, Israel, give Thummim." Jonathan and Saul were selected, and the troops were cleared of any of the charge. Okay. So, up to this point, there's been unrighteousness. They're trying to figure out who it was. Saul split himself and his son Jonathan off from the others, and it ended up coming back that it was either with him, Saul, or it was with Jonathan. Then Saul said, "Cast the lot between me and my son Jonathan," and Jonathan was selected. Saul commanded him, "Tell me what you did." Jonathan told him, "I tasted a little honey with the end of my staff I was carrying. I am ready to die." Saul declared to him, "May God punish me and do so severely if you do not die, Jonathan." But the people said to Saul, "Must Jonathan die? He accomplished such a great deliverance for Israel." "No, as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground, for he worked with God's help today." So the people redeemed Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul gave up the pursuit of the Philistines, and the Philistines returned to their own territory. When Saul assumed the kingship over Israel, he fought against all his enemies in every direction, against the Moab and the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he caused havoc. He fought bravely, defeated the Amalekites, and rescued Israel from those who plundered them. Saul's sons were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua. The name of his two daughters were Merab, his firstborn, and Michal the younger. The name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz. The name of the commander of his army was Abner, son of Saul's uncle Ner. Saul's father was Kish. Abner's father was Ner, son of Abiel. The conflict with the Philistines was fierce all of Saul's days, so whenever Saul noticed any strong or valiant men, he enlisted them. Chapter 15. Samuel told Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you as king over his people. Now listen to the words of the Lord. This is what the Lord of armies says. I witnessed what the Amalekites did to the Israelites when they opposed them along the way as they were coming out of Egypt. Now go and attack the Amalekites and completely destroy everything they have. Do not spare them. Kill men and women, infants and nursing babies, oxen, sheep, camels, and donkeys." Then Saul summoned the troops and counted them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men from Judah. Saul came to the city of Amalek and set up an ambush in the wadi. He warned the Kenites, "Since you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came out of Egypt, go on and leave. Get away from the Amalekites, or I'll sweep you away with them." So the Kenites withdrew from the Amalekites. Then Saul struck down the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to Shur, which is next to Egypt. He captured King Agag of Amalek alive, but he completely destroyed all the rest of the people with the sword. Saul and the troops spared Agag and the best of the sheep, goats, cattle, and choice animals, as well as the young rams and the best of everything else. They were not willing to destroy them, but they did destroy all the worthless and unwanted things. Okay, so they did not do what they were supposed to do. They kept the things that were valuable to them, that they thought were valuable, despite what God was ordering them to do. Verse 10. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. "I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned away from following me and has not carried out my instructions." So Samuel became angry and cried out to the Lord all night. Early in the morning, Samuel got up to confront Saul, but it was reported to Samuel, Saul went to Carmel, where he set up a monument for himself. Then he turned around and went down to Gilgal. When Samuel came to him, Saul said, "May the Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions." So Saul's not even saying anything had happened wrong. Verse 14, Samuel replied, "Then what is the sound of sheep, goats, and cattle I hear?" Saul answered, "The troops brought them from the Amalekites and spared the best sheep, goats, and cattle in order to offer a sacrifice to the Lord your God, but the rest we destroyed." "Stop," exclaimed Samuel. "Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night." "Tell me," he replied. Samuel continued, "Although you once considered yourself unimportant, haven't you become the leader of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and then sent you on a mission and said, 'Go and completely destroy the sinful Amalekites. Fight against them until you have annihilated them.' So why didn't you obey the Lord? Why did you rush on the plunder and do what was evil in the Lord's sight?" "But I did obey the Lord," Saul said. "I went on the mission the Lord gave me. I brought back King Agag of Amalek, and I completely destroyed the Amalekites. The troops took sheep, goats, and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was set apart for destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal." Then Samuel said, "Does the Lord take pleasure in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? Look, to obey is better than sacrifice, Pay attention is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and defiance is like wickedness. The idolatry, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Saul answered Samuel, I have sinned. I have transgressed the Lord's command, and your words, because I was afraid of the people, I obeyed them. Now, therefore, please forgive my sin and return with me so I can worship the Lord. Samuel replied to Saul, I will not return with you, because you rejected the word of the Lord. The Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. When Samuel turned to go, Saul grabbed the corner of his robe and tore it. Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingship of Israel away from you today, and has given it to your neighbor, who is better than you. Furthermore, the Eternal One of Israel does not lie or change his mind, for he is not man who changes his mind. Saul said, I have sinned. Please honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel. Come back with me so I can bow and worship to the Lord your God. Then Samuel went back, following Saul, and Saul bowed down to the Lord. Samuel said, bring me King Agag of Amalek. Agag came to him trembling, for he thought certainly the bitterness of death has come. Samuel declared, as your sword has made women childless, so your mother will be childless among women. Then he hacked Agag to pieces before the Lord at Gilgal. Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to his home in Gibeah of Saul. Even to the day of his death, Samuel never saw Saul again. Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord regretted he had made Saul king over Israel. That is everything for today. So, like I said, interesting stuff, right? Okay, I was going to say something, but it looks like it's in one of the questions, so I'll hold off and I'll elaborate maybe then. Question 1. Saul's decision to offer to sacrifice himself in chapter 13 stems from fear and pragmatism. How does this challenge us to consider whether partial obedience reflects a deeper mistrust in God's timing and providence? Okay, like I said, essentially what this was showing he did not trust God. When you're not sure what to do, you know God has told you to do something, do that thing. If God has not given you an action, don't act. Now, that's not the same as not knowing. I do think that there is time where maybe we can not know and we're trying to step out. But what we see here, what Saul did was just, it was not like a, that's an example. If he was thinking he needed to attack the Philistines and he was trying to decide whether they needed to go right or left, right? And he sought God for it, and he didn't feel like he had an answer. So he picked one. That's not the same as doing something that has been explicitly given as a job or responsibility for a specific people, of which Saul is not one of, right? The sacrifices that are to be made, that those are to be made by the priest, not by Saul. Saul can come up with excuses, just like we come up with excuses many times for disobeying God. Doesn't matter what the excuse is. It's disobeying. That's just it. Question 2. In chapter 15, God regrets making Saul king, yet remains sovereign. How do we reconcile human failure and divine regret with the unchanging nature of God's will and character? So this sounds kind of off, different a little bit. I don't think we should think of God regretting making Saul king quite the same as us. if you say that you regret something, you're saying that if you could go back, you would not do that thing. Like you would make a different choice. I don't think necessarily that's what's being said here, because when God made Saul king, God already knew what Saul was going to do. He already knew what was going to happen. He was already aware. So I think rather it was more of just an acknowledgement that God was saddened, was hurt over what Saul did, over the disobedience of Saul, especially as the one who is the king of his chosen people. Question 3, and this is the one I was going to talk a little bit more on. Samuel declares that to obey is better than sacrifice. Theologically, how does this principle point us to the heart of true worship and foreshadow Christ's perfect obedience? So I was actually talking with my father-in-law about this yesterday. We were talking about the hypostatic union. Fancy word, big word of the day. But the hypostatic union basically is Jesus coming and being fully God, fully man. Now, if he's fully God, him and the Father are one, but there's this difficulty in us to understand that relationship fully. That doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't mean that it's can't happen or not logical or anything like that. It just means that there's a limitation on our ability to understand that. Now, as this pertains to Jesus with being fully God, fully man, and this whole idea of obedience over sacrifice. The sacrifice that we saw, it was going against God's desires, going against what God had commanded, right? Or what God's plan was. Even though Saul claimed his intentions were good, and it may have actually been that they were planning on sacrificing these animals. We don't really have any reason to think that that's not what he was planning. Intentions don't really matter. Obedience is what matters. So we see with Jesus the cross, right? He submitted his will to the Father's. When he's in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's praying and he's sweating drops of blood, he says, if it's possible for this cup to pass from me, then let it pass, but not my will, yours. So he is submitting his. Now, obviously, it's not the same because it's not an apples comparison, but it is a similar idea of what God is wanting is obedience, and Jesus is our example. Now, Saul didn't have Jesus as an example like we do now, but he did have Scripture. He was able to see, like he knew the story of Moses. He knew what had happened there. He knew about how Moses was not able to go into the promised land because disobedience. God did the same thing. If you remember when Moses was supposed to speak to the rock and he struck it instead with the staff. Moses was supposed to speak to the rock, but he struck it. Water still came out. The end result was still the same, but he was not obedient. And because of that, he did not get to go to the promised land. So I feel like I kind of rambled a little bit on that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I feel like I answered that. Okay. That is it for today then. Appreciate everyone watching and listening up to this point. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. I enjoy hearing from people. I'd love to have more interactions with people, and I try to comment back whenever I can, or you can send a message. Facebook, Instagram, and X. X is probably the best way to get a hold of me, formerly Twitter. That's where I'm the most active social media wise. So that would probably be your best bet to get a hold of me if you want to message directly. Um, DMs should be open, I think. So, yeah, if you want to send a private message or anything like that, you can do that there. Comment on the videos. I will comment back, especially if it's on YouTube or Rumble. Other places I may not be as likely to see it, but yeah, you can message there. Word of mouth is the best way to spread podcasts. It sounds weird now in 2025 that word of mouth, but that is the best way the podcast spreads. So if this has been a blessing to you, please share it with other people. It can be a blessing to them as well. Give them somebody that they can read along with and stick to a Bible plan going into the future for the rest of the year, to help them to stick with it for the entire year. No excuses. They'll be able to read along and actually do it. That's something a lot of people have not done, is actually read the Bible every day for a full year, or read through the entire Bible. You'd be surprised at the number of Christians that have not done that. So spread it, pass it along to other people if it's been a blessing to you. Tomorrow, we will be getting back into 1 Samuel, into chapter 16. And we've already seen here that Samuel has said that God has rejected Saul a couple times. So what's going to be coming up next? We get a look at the next king of Israel. I think most people would agree he's the greatest king of Israel to this point. But he won't be the greatest king of Israel ever, if you know what I mean. Talking about Jesus. But yes, we'll be talking about Saul's replacement. God handpicks him, and it's quite a bit different from what we see when God first brings in Saul. So you want to stick around and see that. We'll do that tomorrow. Appreciate everyone watching, listening, all that. Thanks. God bless.